Hey everybody, it's Steve. It's November 12th. I was just talking earlier today, um, but I've got myself limited to. I'm trying to limit myself to about 30 minutes. As if you know me, you know that I've had a difficult time with that overtime. I did a video yesterday. It was damn near 2 hours. So now I'm using a timer. I was using a timer at one time, but it died somehow. One of my spirit animals or whatever it was killed it. Didn't like the idea of me being limited. Nobody puts baby in a corner, something like that. I don't know. But baby's in a corner, man. That's the way it is. I'm just going to make sure for you guys. That's me being selfless, by the way. It's sort of like when you punch a real jackass, right? Normally that's frowned on, okay? But and hear me out. But if you approach it with a good heart, like, hey, that guy is really building some bad karma right now. He's been a real jackass to me. If I were to punch him right in the face and hurt him just enough to teach him a lesson, that could teach him. And that might make it to where he doesn't want to do this in the future to other people. That's what he might need for me to help him. Then when you punch him in the face, not only did you get your jollies, or whatever you want to call it, from punching somebody in the face as being a jackass to you, but you got good karma. Good karma. It's a service to society and the universe. Sometimes karate chopping somebody in the throat or in the balls can be good for you. Not only your mental health, but your universal self, karma. Man, I wish my past lives, one of them, had done that kind of shit more often, because right now I might be, you know, enjoying even more shit in my life. Like I said, you can't buy happiness with life unless you consider sometimes you'd buy a jet ski and you've never ever seen anybody frowning on a jet ski. See my point? I know. That's called wisdom. Fucking wisdom. You're welcome. Okay. So yeah, I was telling a story earlier that I didn't get to finish because of my time limitation. So I was about 7 or so, and I was sitting on the front porch steps with my dad, and I looked over at him, and I remember I had just asked him a question because he had some funny accent stuff and some funny words that he used, and we were Yankees ish. We were living up north in the state of Oregon. You don't get more Yankee than that, really. Even though we were living rurally, we were. My grade school was only, I don't know, quarter of a mile from my house, but the nearest real actual town was probably a 3 hour walk, my guess. But he always said over yonder for stuff, and we were sitting on the porch, and I asked my dad a question. He said over yonder, and I don't know what I asked him even, but where was something? And he pointed to those. He said, he said over yonder, and I said, Dad, and I just totally remember this, and I know how old I was because I remember what was happening around the same time. And I said, Dad, where is over yonder? And I was serious. I wanted to know where this was because he said it all the time, and it was meant to not answer our question. He said, "Where's over yonder?" And he pointed at these hills way off in the distance, so you could only see kind of like a blue haze of them. And I said, "You see those hills over there?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I'm just on the other side of those." I said, "Oh, okay, cool." And so in my mind at that moment, I was like making plans. At one time, I will explore yonder, and all I got to do is walk straight to get to those hills. And I even knew you got to go over the Mackenzie River, you got to go over Deerhorn Road, and then you're in nothingness for quite some time. And you've got to get over those hills, and then you'll be in the land of yonder. And I've been hearing about yonder my entire life, and not just in Oregon, but mostly Oregon. And I'm like, finally, I get to see where yonder is and what it looks like, and everything's there. So I mean, God, that's a neat place, And it just started this whole thing for me. But at the same conversation, though, I'd been looking at him while he was telling me all this stuff, and I suddenly realized I had the idea that whenever people talked about rednecks, they always seemed to be talking about, like on the news or anything like that. Something would come up and my folks would be talking or whatever, and they always have a southern accent. And I just was sitting there and I saw something. I realized on the back of my dad's neck, it was red, from sunburn. And I just remember the wheels. And I said, Dad, and he looked at me. He said, yeah. He said, are you a redneck? And he was a very smart man, had a great sense of humor, and also he was self-deprecating in that he understood the image that people saw him with, because of his accent. He was missing a tooth, a side tooth right here, not a front tooth, but one of these. And so people saw him a certain way as soon as he opened his mouth, especially up north. And he just lowered his head and he said, yeah, I reckon I am. And at the time, it was just funny to him that one of his moron kids asked a stupid question like that. And that it was funnier to him because the kid was sincere and was really asking an actual question. I did not get the question answered, not really, because he was not a redneck. But he appeared to be one. And he heard that every day, one way or the other, either when he opened his mouth and people perceived him and they started, approaching the conversation as if, oh my God, I'm talking to a mongoloid, and I'll do my best to help them understand and make it through this moment of life. Once in a while, he'd come home and he'd tell me something that somebody said. One time he had a job in Iowa where that he was by this time, in his life, he was an extremely accomplished electronics person. He was at engineer level, not with like college training, but with actual Navy training for 14 years. And then after the Navy, on the job training with the elevator union and things like that, they were exploring all the newest stuff that was being introduced to industry. And some guy at this new job he worked at a place called Hawkeye Power Plant. It was a Hawkeye, not power plant, it was a chemical plant. At this point, he wasn't being utilized really for his real skill level. He was basically just a plant electrician, but he was not getting paid as a plant electrician because they had figured out in Iowa that if you don't pay people what they're worth, and everybody else gets together and does the exact same thing, you get people for a lot less than they should get. They had him as a laborer. That was his official title, even though he could definitely compete with every engineer on the place. And one day in a team meeting, where there was lots of people together, one of the classic Iowa shitheads in the room was participating in the meeting, and Dad was asked to get up and do a presentation of what a concept he was trying to put out to everybody so that they can make something more efficient. And he used the term vehicle when he was talking about this acts as a vehicle for that. And this yokel said to him, "Where'd you ever hear that word used that way?" Like he was some kind of moron. That it just shocked him that a monkey could do sign language, And my dad told me that he knew and apparently the guy it wasn't new, it wasn't real. The guy was just an asshole, But at that moment, he was actually surprised that Dad knew how to speak and convey stuff, technical stuff. And he just, at that moment, wanted to punch that guy in the eye real bad. And but he didn't. But he came home and sort of vented when we were chatting, and told me. And and I'd known that people had been, my whole life, I had known that people had been assuming the worst, basically, about my father. Um, my his father-in-law, my mom's dad, never liked him from the get-go, and it was because he was not an officer. My grandpa wasn't an officer, but he wanted my wife, or my wife, his mom, or his daughter. Oh man, some woman that I think I know. He wanted his daughter to marry an officer, even though he didn't even really know any. Um, he was an ignorant man, my grandfather. And my dad used to play kind of a jughead around him on purpose, just so that he could fuck with him. My dad was incredibly intelligent. What the version of the ASVAB is to get into the military. My father missed one question when he took his, and my father never ever discussed that with me. I did not find out that way. Many, many, many years, like 20 years after my dad died, a family, like a cousin, several times removed, told my mom that there's a book that she needs to read because my dad's in it. And she's like, what? And we all knew that he had worked on submarines forever. We all knew that he had a really high security clearance. My mom knew because one time when he came home from being overseas on an unscheduled home visit, that she found an envelope in his duffel bag when he was taking a shower, and as she was putting his stuff away, that was marked top secret. And she opened it up and was trying to look at it because my mom was just that way. And my dad got out of the shower and just happened to see her doing that, and came unglued, grabbed it from her, bare ass naked, and got ready as fast as he could, and then got it uniformed and drove an hour from their home back to base. Why would they live an hour from base? Good question. I asked myself that question my whole life because I heard that story over and over and over again. Anytime my dad was ever present, he would just like, that's your mom. And so we all knew he had a big clearance. When I went into the National Guard, at some point I was sitting, and then my dad died while he was in the National Guard. And after the funeral and stuff, at some point I was talking with the CEO about something, and he was saying, yeah, he said your dad's files always messed with me. And I said, why? And he said, well, they were 2 inches thick, and he had a huge career. He said, except the problem is that almost everything in there was redacted. I couldn't, he had this giant file of many, 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 many papers, except that by far most of it was completely unreadable. And I said, well, why would they even put that in the file? He said, because all those pages are numbered, and all the numbers corresponded with dates and stuff like that. So if pages were missing, so was time in service missing. And all these events, the file had to be complete, whether it was in the Pentagon or whether it was in the hands of the company commander of his Iowa National Guard unit. The difference would be in the Pentagon that nothing would be redacted. And for my CO, it was almost all redacted. And he said, as soon as I saw that, he became the CO after my dad joined. And he said, as soon as I saw that, I knew we had somebody working here that actually knew what the hell he was doing, because it was a communications unit. And in that unit, about 8 people had a clearance like my dad's. I was one of them. The CO was one of them. 3 people that worked with my dad were them, and a few other people. and a couple people that worked with me, because in my particular job, there was, in a signal node, there's lots of different kinds of jobs, that all make the signal node work. Um, and there were 3 groups in the signal node that had my clearance, my dad's clearance. One was the encryption people, which was what my dad was doing. It's not what he did in the Navy, but that's what he was doing in the signal battalion. I was in what they called patch panel, which was tactical circuit controller. My job and people in my group were doing is basically quality control, quality of the circuit, quality of the communication circuit. We were constantly listening to all channels, every circuit, to find problems and then to fix problems. So we would be listening to these things, and we'd be watching the signal, the frequency on an oscilloscope, and we would be determining where the problems were by isolating the groups, the sections of communication. And we would call up another group called the cable dogs, who laid cable, because back then most of it was hardwire. And we would tell them, hey, go to section so and so and look for a problem, like there's a junction that's bad, or there's damage to the cable or whatever. And we would call the switchboard guys, and we would say, hey, it's possible that the port you're using or that the wire you're using is malfunctioning. So try to change ports and try to use a different jumper, that kind of thing. We would call all these places, but the idea was that we were always listening. Nobody could ever hear us. There was no kind of alert whatsoever that we were listening. We had the ability to listen, and one of the very first things that they would do to us when we got into the job in the very beginning was they would impress us by calling. We would call ourselves. The person would be in this little box that's in the back of a big truck, and the box is called a van, and they would say, okay, hold on, you see us, and they have a dry erase board. You see us right here, and they write a little number down. That's us, and a circle, and then they would say, okay, we're going to call to this, and then we're looking at a map. They'd be pointing at this, and we're going to call this, and they're using grease pens on this big map, and we're going to call this, and then they would basically show us how they would circumnavigate the Earth to call ourselves, not just calling. Oh, I'm going to call Russia. I'm going to call this. I'm going to call that. They would literally know all the different circuits they had to know to literally circumnavigate the Earth to come right back to call us on this other phone that's on this other wall. And we're talking old school. This is in the 80s. So it was all analog, except for the oscope in our van. And we were pirating circuits. We were able to tap into existing trunk lines that were laid communications infrastructure, people's phone lines, right? All over the Earth. And this is how they would impress us. And then they would say, okay, we're connecting to this, and we're connecting that to that, and we're connecting that to that. And they would make sure and go through enemy countries so they could see us be impressed. We went through Russia. Couldn't go through China because China had no infrastructure. Not really. A lot of it was always in bad condition by that time and stuff. But we would go through all kinds of, as long as the country that they wanted to go through was in the way, African countries, all kinds of shit, And went through Germany. Germany was our friend, so it didn't matter, but it was interesting, And then come all the way back around, and the phone on the other side of the wall would ring, and pick it up, and it's that guy talking. Have one of us pick it up so we can hear the guy, and hey, you hear me? And we could really hear him. The security part of it would be that if we were just a signal node for a communications node that was in a combat situation, we could be on the good side of the enemy lines, or we could be on the wrong side of the enemy lines, which was common in combat for us. We could be 10 miles on the other side of the enemy lines, dropped in, with our trucks parachuted in, with us parachuted in, the whole bit. and we're directing fire. We're not directing fire. A An infantry unit is calling in fire to the artillery people. The artillery people are 5 miles on the good side of the enemy line. These infantry people or special forces or whatever they are could be 10 miles on the other side of the enemy line, which is where sometimes we could be, just so that we would be useful to them. So if there was artillery falling on places, it was because our stuff was working. Okay. If the CO that was, their commanding officer had something to say, he was on the good side of the enemy line. He'd be calling these, front lookers of infantry or whatever, and that had to go through us. So we were listening in all the time to all this stuff to make sure that it was in good condition. And if somebody said, I can't hear something, we made changes and we fixed things, real fast. And that was one part of our job. The civilian side of our job is we were listening to, or participating in listening to, people monitoring other people's phone calls. And they were basically looking for people accidentally or on purpose divulging classified information. And there would be several. We'd be watching five phones, and if any one of those phones lit up, we were to listen in and to make sure that the other people on the other end of our stuff was listening and able to listen, right? And so we heard a lot of weird shit. The longer you do that, the more you hear. And so you had to have a really good clearance. So I had a TSSCI clearance, which is top secret segmented compartmentalized information. So segmented and compartmentalized means I know what I need to know, but I don't know everything. There's another guy that knows what he needs to know, but he doesn't know what I know. There's another guy somewhere that knows what he needs to know, but he doesn't know what either one of us knows. That way, nobody can give away secrets that are one big secret. All they could do is give away a piece that's useless by itself, right? And so America has had the top secret segmented and compartmentalized information clearance for a long, long time. There's a lot of people when it gets into computer stuff, like Snowden and, that's genius level though. And then you get down into that one nutty kid that was a PFC or something, private first class, E3, that forwarded all kinds of photographs, like thousands of documents. When things went digital, it changed a lot of shit. But forwarded all kinds of information to like WikiLeaks. He went to prison, but eventually he got out, I think. Snowden's never been caught. Last I knew, he's either in Russia or China or some fucking place like that. I don't think Snowden should have ever gotten caught. He might have gone too far with it and stuff. A lot of people believe he did. At the same time, thanks to the Bush administration, they were passing a lot of laws and they were doing things that were trying to turn us into a police state, which now I don't know how much of the current administration, which is just a fucking shit show, is using some of those old things, or if they even care. I don't think they even care, but I don't know that anything is still useful from the Bush era. But anyway, Snowden saw that we were doing things we shouldn't be doing, that things that were violating international law and even our own personal rules, and wanted the public to know, because we were the voting bodies, we were the people that believed in the bullshit we were hearing, and we were hearing bullshit, and things were going way out of hand. And things like that, they don't stay where they're at ever. They go in cycles. You violate the Geneva Convention, you violate the rules of engagement, and you're given kind of an okay. Nobody found out. It's good. You accomplished a lot. We were able to accomplish a lot. Nobody found out, so it's good. And then next time it's worse, and next time it's worse, and that's the problem. That's the concern. And so Snowden saw that this was happening, and he felt like that he was the only one that could see that this is happening and had the courage to do something about it. And I know a lot of high level security people that fucking hate Snowden and would shoot him on sight. Not joking you. And that I disagree with them. I mean, maybe I'm far enough removed from it to where that I can think independently without having to be too connected. I mean, I grew up hearing duty, honor, country. I was in the military. I said duty, honor, country more times than I can imagine. I still say it in my sleep. I still dream it. When I took not the ASVAB, but I took, before I went to take the ASVAB for the second time, because I wanted to reenlist. When I found out a way I could reenlist, I passed the test verbatim, like 100%, and it was given in a recruiter's office, and they thought, and they weren't paying attention to me. They were, talking and stuff amongst themselves, and then the person who had administered the test to me said, "Oh, yeah, let's redo this. I didn't want you to look in the book," and I, because at one time there's all kinds of books laying all over the place, and I said I didn't look in the book, and he said, "What?" After he rated the stuff, and he said, "But you didn't miss anything," and it's like literally all exactly like it's in the book. Well, I said, that's the book I studied, when I was in, and from the get-go. So no, this is all just out of my head. And 3 or 4 recruiters are sitting around looking at each other like, what? And this is like 2002, and I got out in 1990. And I got in 1986. And so I was only in 4 years. And they're like, you haven't been in since 1990. That was over 10 years ago. That's 12 years ago. And you still know the shit that good? And I'm like, well, it's the military, It's not like college. College or high school or anything else, you don't remember everything, But in the military, they figured out a long time ago how to get everything into your head. If they want you to learn something, you'll learn it. I mean, it's the exact same tactics that are scientifically used for brainwashing, right? Which are also now the same tactics that are used for marketing. We don't say when we want a container that'll hold liquid and keep it cold or keep it hot. We say thermos. Even though that's a brand. That container's called a thermos though, and plastic dishes that have a top on them that keep food fresh, that's Tupperware. Hey, can you hand me that Tupperware? It's not Tupperware. It's a something else. I bought it at the store. It's Rubbermaid or whatever. Yeah, I know, but it's a piece of Tupperware. Just hand it to me. Yeah, I need some new Tupperware. Do you even know anybody that sells Tupperware? I mean, Walmart. No, they don't sell Tupperware. They sell Rubbermaid or some generic shit. Still called Tupperware. That kind of stuff. Well, I'm almost to the end of my next half an hour. And by the way, the reason I brought up marketing is I have a bachelor's degree in marketing. So I was talking about my dad and how, his views on racism and stuff like that. And when he was a kid in Mississippi, and he grew up in Tupelo. He was born in Alabama, but grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi, and graduated high school in Tennessee at a place called Oak Ridge High School. And but the place in Mississippi that he grew up was real poor, had lots of really, really poor people because his father was a really, really, really bad drunk, and I believe it was due to PTSD from World War II. But he would abandon the family on a regular basis completely. Just nobody knows where he's at or if he's ever coming back. And I think it started out maybe as him going to find work or something, quote unquote, but he would be on a drunk that would last for, months at a time. And so his wife and the 5 or 6 kids, whatever there was in the family, would go hungry and all that. And there were really terrible stories about that I always heard as a kid that my grandma would send my dad with one bullet, 122 bullet, and their 22 rifle to school, and she would say, if you don't get something on the way home, don't come home. In other words, you better fucking get something or we won't be eating supper. And, if you got a rabbit, how is that going to feed an adult person and 5 children? 122 bullet, because that's all she could afford to give him, supposedly. And, fuck. They're supposed to eat whatever vegetables they got and 1 rabbit or whatever, They ate more squirrels than anything when I was a kid. I was told that. And my dad was teaching me how to hunt squirrels because that was normal, And we ate a lot of squirrels because I hunted them all the time. We didn't eat them. My dad made money, but he wanted me to learn how. And that's one of the ways I became a good shot because, hitting a squirrel is not that fucking easy. And hitting a running rabbit is another thing that's not that easy. Taught me how to distract them, make them stop so I could shoot them, that kind of thing. But anyway, which then paid me back later because when I was in the military, I fired expert when I was in basic training and maintained it. So there's 3 different levels, and expert is the top. And when I was in basic, there was 85 guys in my platoon, and 2 people, me and 1 other person, fired expert. And the reason I missed 2 different targets was because my weapon jammed twice, and I was able to clear them in time, but not in time to get the target down. But every shot I was actually able to take hit right where they were supposed to. So, and this was on a brand new $2 million range. At the time, $2 million in 1986 was good. But it's because my dad taught me how to hunt. And when he was a kid living in Mississippi, he told me at one time he didn't just see a black man hanging, he saw a hanging. He was a little kid, and it was apparently like an event. There was a lot of people there, and saw a black person get strung up. And he didn't tell me who else was there or anything like that. Told me he was a little kid, and that the whole time while it was happening, he noticed that everybody around him had celebratory faces on, and that there was lots of laughing and happiness and cheers and stuff. And he said it struck him as madness, as crazy shit, that people that were his community, adults, were behaving as though they were at a parade. Literally, that's what he told me. It seemed like a parade. But that somebody was being murdered in front of them all. Some black man, and as far as my dad knew, he had done nothing wrong. But they didn't like him because he was black. And in my dad's little kid mind, that was all he understood, was he was black, therefore he was bad. And even as whatever, when I got this, when I was having the talk with my dad, it sounded like he was 5 or 6 years old, and that he thought about that, and he, for a long time as a child, what he had seen was horrific, and he couldn't make sense of it. He couldn't. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't a celebration of people coming home from war. It wasn't a celebration of the 4th of July. It wasn't Memorial Day or something. It was somebody being murdered in front of him. The person was alive, and then he was dead slowly. And everybody was acting like that was great. And it changed him. It made him think, and it changed him for his whole life. And when he got out of the Navy, he was going through some real trauma at the time. But that's also why when he got out of the Navy, he brought us back to Mississippi. And he was trying to live there, and he was trying to work there. And, he had spent 14 years away from there. and working with black people, in his same capacity. And in all that time, realized that there was literally no difference between black people and white people. They were just as capable as we are. They were just as good-hearted as we are. That there were plenty of black people that were bad, but there are plenty of white people that are bad. And that there wasn't a good way to compare. There was no obvious comparison other than the way things were being perceived. I was born in 1968, same year Martin Luther King was killed, just a few years after JFK was killed, the same year that Bobby Kennedy was murdered. During riots, race riots, and things like that. And people were having to, Vietnam War protests and things like that. And a lot of people were facing very publicly some very important, deep questions, philosophical questions about how their life works. And he realized that he did not want to bring his children up around there. And I was around, by the time they got to Mississippi, I was probably 3-4 years old, and I was running around in diapers kind of a thing. And the things he was seeing from his cousins and things like that, and from people that lived around, he didn't want us to become that. And he knew that he was a very smart man, but he knew that the only way to get us out of that was to stop having us be there. And so we moved up north to Illinois, to Morrison, Illinois, where it was close to where my parents, or my mom's people, was from. And they when we were in Mississippi, my dad was trying to make his own business as a logger of a logging company. He bought his own log truck, was dropping trees, buying or renting, leasing properties to drop the trees, haul them off to had a machine that was attached to the log truck that grabbed the logs and all that, could stack them, and taking them to paper mills. And so he was doing okay that way, as okay as people get, but he realized he had to get out. And so brought us up there, and we tried to farm. And they were successful at that. He sold one crop to Vlasic because of cucumbers, because they turned out, they were pickle cucumbers. They were the right size and all that kind of stuff, but they turned out really light yellow. And Vlasic decided that was awesome. They had a great flavor. They were the right texture, all that stuff. And so they made a brand new label and everything for my dad's crop. And, bottled them and sold them until that crop was gone. And so they were doing okay. They were renting this farm. And it was a pretty run-down house, though. My mom and dad were fighting at that time, and I don't remember what it was about. I was 4. And I remember a lot of stuff from then. I don't remember anything from Mississippi. But I remember a lot of stuff from Morrison, Illinois. And I shouldn't say I don't remember anything from Mississippi. It's really little tiny clips. I remember being in the back of somebody's car that's taking me to maybe babysit me. And I remember being in the car, standing up in the back seat and looking out the back window. We're going down a gravel road and seeing the dust, and I knew I was leaving where I wished I was. My parents were in my home, were there, and I was leaving there, and I was going with people I didn't want to be with. That's, but that's every little kid. They don't want to go to bed. They don't want to go, to family's house if mom and dad's not going to be there. Anyway, that, and I remember being fed on a high chair by somebody I don't remember. I don't remember their face. But I still, to this day, remember the taste of whatever it is I was being fed, and it was fucking amazing. And I can remember the taste right now as in my mouth. I've never been able to duplicate that, probably because it was something that babies got fed. But I've been looking for that flavor my rest of my life, at different times, and I've given up forever and ever. But it was something that babies got fed, and so never got to taste it again. But I can still taste it now in my mouth if I think to it. Not real hard even. It went into a permanent place in my brain. But my folks were fighting, and my mom left. Took us kids. We even have a picture of us and my mom sitting at the airport. We're all dressed up. And we flew to California where my grandmother and grandfather lived because he was in the Navy, my grandfather, like San Diego. And then my dad basically packed all of his shit up that he wanted to bring, and he drove a car, abandoned the farm, and drove a car to California, which is why they were still together, because my mom left. And that's how we started living in California, and that's why we ended up living in the state of Oregon. Because when we were in California, which I remember every second of California, we lived in 2 different places. In one place, then we moved to another place. I remember the kindergartens. I remember getting chased by a bunch of Mexican kids that wanted to kick our asses, but we escaped. I remember going to the store and getting to buy sugar cane, which was pieces of sugar cane like this for kids, basically, to just chew on. I remember buying this, getting these sugar cane pieces, me and my brothers, and we're all just chewing on these damn sticks. They tasted delicious, though. So, yeah. The first place we lived in there was in San Pasqual, California, and we lived in the guy that had been the Tin Man in the Wizard of Oz. It was his house, and he rented it to us out in the middle of the desert. Right across this dry riverbed was an animal preserve, so we always smelled basically rhinoceros shit. But it was an amazing house, trippy, amazing house, awesome for me. I was like 4 still. And I remember my kindergarten. Every morning as we were waiting for the bus to go to school, me and my brothers, we had to go this long driveway to go to the road. And we would stand in front of this gigantic orange orchard. And we could just pick oranges and eat them. And to me, oranges seemed this big. And they were fucking amazing. And we would go to school, and I'd spend the day fucking with my teachers and getting spanked, and get sent home eventually with everybody else, playing Duck, Duck, Go and shit like that. Then we moved away from there and went to Santee. So we first lived in San Pasqual, then we went to Santee. It was closer to my grandparents. It was out of the desert, it was in town. My brothers went to school there, and I went to a different kindergarten there. And I remember tons and tons and tons of stuff. Lots of events that happened there. A parade, and then also just home stuff, this kid, a local friend of mine, a neighbor kid that I was trying to help escape his parents. He showed up at my bedroom window one night, knocked on the window. I opened the window. He came in, went underneath my bed. He was there for a couple of days. Nobody knew where he was except for me. And I kept sneaking him food from the kitchen and bringing it into him. And eventually they caught me harboring this felon. And his name was Guy. And got sent back home to the Nazi prison camp that he escaped from. And I remember lots and lots of things from that house, that property. And then we moved. My dad had a job there with a company called U.S. Elevator, and they offered once he went through the beginning part, which was construction, where that every elevator guy has to go through so they can be familiar with the full scale of how elevator stuff works. They offered him a promotion, and he could choose one of 3 cities, and he traveled to the 3 cities, and then he went back and he told him he wanted to go to Eugene, Oregon, and So they sent us all up to Eugene, Oregon to live, and that's how we wound up there. But and my education in anti-racism began then. I guess I reached the age where my dad felt like I could understand what he was saying and what he was talking about and stuff, and I remember every second of it. Now, I don't remember if there was anything that he did that was really sly, that was supposed to teach me. But I remember a lot of stuff that was clearly obvious for me, like when he introduced me to the man that lived near us that was black. Um, I understood that. I was old enough to understand that, what he was doing. And he was a very nice man. And my father had a lot of had a good opinion of him, and it was treated with a lot of reverence. And so I realized it was very important. Um, and there was a lot more to it. A lot of things went on for the next several years before I turned into an asshole. All kids, when they're 12 to 12, 13 years old, turn into dicks. And one of the reasons I'm really, really happy I never had kids. Cats are always the same. They're always dicks. You get used to them after a while, but they never ask for money. They might cost you a little here and there, but there's no cops ever called and none of that stuff. So, and I knew who I was and what I did to them for the time that I was in diapers all the way up. I don't know how anybody would have survived that, or much less let the kid live. But anyway, so yeah, it's almost an hour. So I was trying to limit myself to half an hour. You guys heard the alarm. I ignored that. Imagine that. But I am going to adhere to that. And then I'm going to tell you a continuation of this story about my dad. Okay, so you guys take it easy, and my next post will be a continuation, probably today, of a thing with my dad. And it's a really interesting story to me. And it's something that almost nobody else's dad ever experienced, or they've experienced as a result of their dad. So be cool. Have a great day. If you don't want to re-engage this next thing today, I understand completely. Then do something fun. Have a good one.